I wonder if you have a story from your own life about religious people fighting each other. I have a lifetime of them. They started early in my life. I grew up in southeast Texas where Catholics were sort of a rarity, except in our county because we're right on the Louisiana border. And South Louisiana has lots of Catholics in an area that mostly is evangelical Protestant, heavily Baptist. Well, I was just a little kid growing up in Catholic school. One of the most fun times of the year was the carnival that raised money to support our school. You know, those little rides that come in from out of town and booths that go up and food, carnival food. It was a lot of fun. And then alongside it with this boring adult thing, that was called a cakewalk. Think Wheel of Fortune. It's this circle and it has like little wedges like they have on Wheel of Fortune. And somebody, you pay a quarter to get to be in this circle. There's a record player and somebody just picks up the tone arm of it or puts it down and the music starts and everybody starts walking around in a circle. And then at some point the person picks up the tone arm and the music stops and everybody has to stay where they are. But it's numbered and there's a cake that somebody baked. You paid a quarter, but the cake probably cost $5. But if you were in the right spot, you won the cake. Doesn't that sound dull? But the adults had to have something to do. Well, it got a little less dull when the pastor of First Baptist Church, only a block away from our church, had our pastor arrested for running a gambling den. I was only in the first grade, but I knew that was nasty. That there was a really pretty harmless thing, grown-ups walking around in a circle, paying a quarter, hoping they would win a cake. Well, that was just the way it was. There was just a really ugly attitude between Catholic and Protestant folk where I grew up. And by the way, it wasn't about race. The whole town was white. But you can always find something to argue about. You don't have to make it be race. It can be something else. This time it was religion. Well, I learned too that the Catholics and the Baptists disagreed about the Bible. We were taught about God creating stuff, and it says right there on page 1 that on the first day God creates light. Let there be light, and there's light. But then you keep reading, and you have to go all the way to day 4 before God creates the sun and the moon and the stars. So, well, what did he make on day 1? What was that light? So we were being taught even in first grade that these our scripture stories tell us some things, but other things are a mystery. And we were just kind of taught even at the first grade level to try to make room for both of those things at the same time. But I was being raised in a counterculture that was saying, no, the Bible is inerrant. Every word of it is absolutely true because God wrote it. And God says nothing but true things. And so you ended up having to believe, in all kind of things that didn't make sense even to a first grader. But then we also had arguments about who would go to heaven, because outside the church, that is the Catholic Church, there is no salvation. Did you ever hear that? I did. So if you wanted to take that and run with it, you have to be a Catholic or you don't get in. And then, of course, from the Baptist point of view, I didn't know what a whore was or where Babylon was. But I knew what an insult sounded like. And we were called the whore of Babylon. I was just 6 years old. But it was in the air you breathed. I'm looking at a whole bunch of masked people at church. Not a whole bunch. Very few sitting far apart. But in the air we breathe, there's something unhealthy, which is why we're masked. But in the air I was breathing as a 6-year-old, there was something unhealthy. It dribbled over into Scripture. I ended up being really interested in the Bible and in Scripture study But I didn't really do a methodical study until I got all the way into seminary. By that time, I was like 23, 24. But I loved it when I started hearing, that we've got 4 Gospels, and they're all talking about mostly the same thing, but they're talking about it from 4 different points of view. And if you start studying what we think we know about the point of view, who wrote that Bible, about that Gospel, where were they, when were they writing, who were they writing to, and what was going on around them. Wow, I just never had known that you could study it that way. Which brings me to Matthew, because this is for preachers in the Catholic tradition. It's the year of Matthew. We have Matthew all year long. For me, one of the challenges of Matthew is that things will be going along really nice in a story until you get to the last sentence. Matthew likes to end a section with, and there will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Matthew kind of ends a lot of his passages on what you musicians would be a sour note. And then after that you say, the word of the Lord, thanks be to God. Well, here's what I learned about Matthew. Matthew is purported to be the Jewish tax collector, remember? Now, his gospel ends up in written form somewhere fairly late, about the year 85 or 90, maybe even a little bit later than that. And, he was an adult already in around 30. So he's probably died in the meanwhile, but there's a tradition. And there's kind of a Matthean school of people that continue kind of in his way of thinking and experiencing things. He was a Jew. Jesus was a Jew. Almost all of Jesus' followers were Jewish to begin with. And then over those decades, the word begins to go out, that seed that gets sown, good soil, bad soil, the brambles, the footpath, all of that. Over that, much of those decades of that first century of the church's life, there's this really mixed reception. Sometimes the gospel is heard and received and thrives, and then other times they're chased out of town or even killed. For those who had been ethnically and religiously Jewish, spoke Hebrew, knew all the kosher dietary laws, all of that, for a while they could get away with being both what they used to be and kind of an overlay of Jesus as the Messiah, as a kind of a next iteration, a next step. And they could observe the Sabbath on what we call Saturday, but then on Sunday, on the first day of the week, they could do this thing, the breaking of the bread, and do both. That worked for a while until in the year 70, the Roman-Jewish War blew up big time. The Romans just came in and just slaughtered the place, tore the temple down, got rid of the priesthood, which has never come back. There's never been a Jewish priesthood after that. And then they depopulated the city of Jerusalem. No Jew could live there. Can you imagine? It was just boom. So they had to scatter, and then this gospel grew up among this scattered people. And then it got even worse, because these two strands of the same religious family began to see each other as enemy, as opponent. I looked up enemy because I love words. Ami in France is friend. Amigo in Espanol, friend. Ami is not friend. Not friend. And they decided to be not friend. The remnants of the Jewish Pharisaical party got together and decided it's hard enough for us to hold our community together with Jerusalem destroyed, with the temple destroyed, Jerusalem depopulated. The last thing we need is this confusion of some of our members saying that this guy that was crucified is also the Messiah. They got together and decided we're not tolerating that anymore, and at the end of the service, they put a curse on any who believed that Jesus of Nazareth is the Messiah. That was bad enough, but that also meant to the Romans, the Jews always had a military exemption. The Jews were not forced to be in the Roman military because they were monotheists. and the Roman emperor was considered a god, they gave the Jews a pass. And Jewish Christians kind of got that same pass until the year 90, and now you could be conscripted into the military because you didn't come under that layer anymore. I probably spent about half my preaching time today just getting to this point. It was ugly, and Matthew's community grew up in that ugliness. And it shows up from time to time, in fact, too often, I think, and it's even in there today. I use the short form. Today there's a short form and a long form, and the long form goes into that ugliness, so I chose the short form. But what's the kernel in the story? Jesus is saying, okay, there's this guy that owns a field. The field is good. I think it's the universe. The field is good, no question about it. It's good that it's fertile, and we're going to use its fertility for good. And I want you to go and sow these good seeds. Okay? Good field, good seeds, good intention, good sowers. Everybody's done their part. But then inside the story, unknown to everyone, an enemy, a not friend, came and sows weeds and then runs off. We don't even know who the non-friend, the enemy is, just some enemy. They come and sow bad seed. They grow up side by side. The ones who sowed the seed notice it and say to the master, what about this? We're getting nasty results. We're getting weeds growing up right next to the wheat. Do you want us to uproot them? Has there been times in your life where you wanted to do that? Just uproot something or someone because their bad fruit was so evident? They were just trying to be helpful. The owner has the good sense to say no, because if you do that, their roots are probably going to be grown together. If you pull up one, you're going to pull up the other. Tell you what, you've done your job. Let me do mine. I'll take it from here. That's where I find the most comfort. I'm not in charge of how it all turns out. I am in charge of doing my part to sow good seed. I'll take it from here. You just do your part, and I got the rest of it. And what is the rest of it? It says, we'll let the weeds and wheat grow until the harvest time. Then I'll tell the harvesters, separate out the weeds and the wheat. Take the weeds and throw them in the flames. Take the wheat and put it in my barn. The word of the Lord. What does it not say? The story and the guy in the parable doesn't say, I know what I'll do. I'm going to ruthlessly hunt down that enemy, and I'm going to take him and his weeds and throw them all in the fire. That's what it doesn't say. But have you ever heard it that way? That whoever sowed that seed deserves to go in the fire with the weeds? That's not what Jesus says. And he proved it with the manner of his death. Do you remember when it was getting really, really dark and Jesus was being arrested, and a helpful follower with a sword pulls it out, cuts off the ear of Jesus, what does he say? Put that thing away. They challenge him to call on all the angels to come and save him. And in the course of it, maybe give Pontius Pilate his comeuppance. And what about Judas? Hunt him down? None of that. He just says, I see an enemy's hand in this, in the story. And help me out with this. Didn't Jesus say something about the way we're supposed to treat an enemy? Do you remember? You've all got masks on, so I'm not getting anything out of you. Can you remember what Jesus said to do when you have an enemy, someone behaves as a not friend? Love them. Maybe they'll turn from being a not friend to a friend. You're never in charge of that, but it could happen. Your love might transform a former enemy to an ame, to an amigo. I believe that's what we've been called to. It's a high standard. And you can understand why in different times and places we keep dumbing it down and making it kind of go away. It's too hard. It's too impractical. But have you ever been in a circumstance where you were held to a really high standard and you were proud that you were thought worthy to be held to a high standard? You know? Like getting accepted to the honors college. I remember when I worked at Stanford, everybody there knew it was way harder than a lot of other places they could go, and they were so delighted to be in a place where they knew they'd be held to a high standard. How about you? Do you think you're up for that, even during the pandemic? Maybe all the more because the times around us call for more than this same old battle of us against them, mask wearers against non-mask wearers, any other thing you can think of to disagree about. The Lord is one and creates unity. But he asks that that be what we sow, that we go and sow that good seed, and that when we feel the need to get in there and uproot somebody else's stuff because they're our enemy, well, maybe we think again. And remember, we haven't been put in charge of eternity. We've just been put in charge of this lifetime and its moments. Today, as we move toward the altar and receive the power that comes in the grace of the Eucharist, maybe we say to the Lord, empty out of me any part of me that wants to be the boss of this whole thing and who wants to make sure that somebody gets their comeuppance. That's somebody that I'm thinking of as an enemy. Begin growing in me that seed that might help me see them as my not yet friend.